Yeah, I mean, it reminds me a little bit of kind of the conversation we have, or some people have, about what's going on in Palestine right now, right? In the sense that, there's kind of different positions, right? One is like the left position that like none of this shit should be going on at all, right? And then there's kind of like a more centrist position where it's like Israel, which is kind of what Bernie says right now, right? To a lot of people's, but like, let's be clear about what he says. Bernie doesn't like there is a middle ground of like, I don't like the indiscriminate bombing, but they have the right to take out Hamas, right? And then there's what he was doing, right? Which is that so what I'm saying is that if you have a geopolitical goal, he will excuse any kind of fucking mass murder and violence in the pursuit of that geopolitical goal. And there is no onus of proof to really say that it was really necessary, which is why I'm glad that you called him out on that, because this is litigating something which is a long time ago, but, it wouldn't have been fair for him to just, throw that in that, we had to do that. And then he went back on but, I'm not saying this is good or bad, but I am saying that we needed to do it, which is really weird. But I don't know. Do you see what I mean? I'm saying, which is like, there's the geopolitical goal, which is like, even people, you could have the same goal as him, which is to say like, do some kind of show of force without that show of force being 150,000 or whatever it is, or millions of civilian deaths, or what's going on in Palestine. You know what I mean? So as leftists, we don't agree with the geopolitical goal at all. But I still think it's weird that like these differences are completely elided by these justifiers of of these mass murders. So it's very logically weak in my opinion. It's really weak.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that something like this sort of middle ground position Bernie is trying to take on Gaza doesn't really make sense because it all seems to be premised on the idea that like there's some scenario where this like far right settler dominated government whose officials are constantly using like borderline genocidal language that like those people would like just do this in a nicer way. Right. Like, I don't really think that makes sense. I obviously love the guy, but I want Bernie to do better on this. But yeah, I like the distinction you're making here more generally. Right. Because it's like, yeah, in this case, especially the Vietnam case, I mean, the Israel case is more complicated just because like, frankly, ideologically, I like Hamas a lot less than I like the Viet Cong, but there's, it's flawed and authoritarian, but it's like, look, I mean, out of the players in that situation, they look pretty good to me. I'm broadly sympathetic to the idea that the Vietnamese Revolution, was a good thing, so obviously I think that like propping up this kind of like, corrupt, unpopular, certainly no more democratic than North Vietnam was, government in South Vietnam was like a worthy goal, right? Like that's not a goal that I like at all. But and even similarly in Israel, it's like, yeah, look, if there was some button you could press so that like, Hamas wouldn't, do attacks like 10/7 again, then sure, press it. Yes, for sure. Right. That's a terrible thing that happened. But like, I think the real goal in practice is more about, the sort of long-term Israeli domination of that territory. And so I also don't like that one. Right. But it is important to be clear on not liking the goals, but it is also important to be clear that it's like, look, we can almost put that aside because it's like, even if these were wonderful goals, it's like, this is still like just imperial wishful thinking. Like, you're not going to accomplish that, right? This is the sort of thing. I want to move on pretty quickly, because we got a lot to go. But this is like the sort of thing that always struck me at the beginning of last year, so almost 2 years ago, when Putin invaded Ukraine. There was all this discussion of, why would he do that? Is it in some sense kind of shocking because it's like it seems like pretty obvious that that's not actually going to serve Russian interests, in practice, right? That obviously going to lead to all of these, this global isolation, et cetera, et cetera. But it's like, look, great powers are often led by people who do stupid things, right? That's not a rare situation, right? That just because you are in a decision-making position within within a major like imperial power, that doesn't mean that you must be some sort of, Machiavellian grand chessboard super genius, right? This is people in those positions make self-destructive decisions all the time. And it's like, yeah, it's not gonna, it's like, yeah, there was no way that they were gonna get, end the war in Vietnam on better terms by killing a shitload of Cambodians, right? And they didn't, right? We know they didn't because we can compare the deal they sabotaged to the deal they took. And I totally agree with your point. This is very relevant when you think about these more recent examples, like the case, certainly the case in Palestine. It's like, do you think Hamas is just not going to exist because of all this stuff is happening? That seems awfully unlikely, right? And even if it did, I can't wait to see what comes next, right? The successor organization, and I think there's a sort of an enduringly important point, right? Because it's not just a matter of correcting the record about what this one, now departed ghoul did in Southeast Asia, 50 years ago, right? There's a more general point here that I think really comes out with this, right? Like Compact put out, I thought, a pretty bad Kissinger article by Malcolm Cayun. And if you look at the position that's taken in that article, or you look at this guy I was arguing with on News Nation, or you look at, for anybody who watched our breakdown last Thursday, the position that Sagar was taking in that debate, it's essentially all the same thing. And I think that this is really important for contemporary reasons. That it's like, okay, there are a lot of people now who will say from various perspectives, oh, we don't like the neocons, right? We want some sort of more realist approach to foreign policy, but they don't all mean the same thing, right? Like, is the objection, yep, that's the one. Yeah, he basically says, oh, look at all these, horrible things that neocons and liberal interventionists who thought they were very moral did in the last few decades. That's really what we should be talking about, not Kissinger. And if anything, Kissinger was better because he was like a pragmatic realist. And it's like, okay, again, even ignoring the fact that Kissinger supported the war in Iraq and was like a confidant and advisor to George W. Bush, which is, pretty fucking relevant. I mean, Bush, in fact, I think we have the tweet from Bush where he's memorializing Kissinger. We also have his oil painting, right? Since Bush's post-presidential career, he took up oil painting. I believe we have the oil. Yes, that's the Bush oil painting of Kissinger, right? Bush and Kissinger were tight. Kissinger was very on record supporting the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So it's like the historical record is wrong. But there's also, I think, a more important thing. This is the last thing before we move on, which is just, yeah, okay, almost everybody can agree now that the neocons are bad. That's kind of become a bad word, right? Very few people will call themselves that anymore, even though, there are lots of people who describe. But why, right? What's our objection to these guys? Right? Is our objection to these guys that they couldn't care less about international law and that they start aggressive wars around the world that lead to, terrible human suffering and, and are often based on wishful thinking, etc.? Or is our objection to them their like rhetoric about loving democracy and human rights and stuff? Because those are actually kind of opposite critiques. Right? Like, I object to the neocons because I actually do like democracy and human rights. And I can see that, like, the kind of thing they support, is not going in that direction in practice, right? A more humane, more democratic, better world. And if you don't like the neocons for the opposite reason, we might be saying some of the same words at the same time. We might even come to conjecturally similar conclusions about some instances, but we are not on the same page. You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns,
all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.